I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. Today we're talking about public housing in New York City and the situation that's happening for many New Yorkers who have fallen behind on rent. But first, the latest in the classified documents saga. This week, aides to former Vice President Mike Pence found documents with classified markings in his Indiana home. How do these documents get to insecure places, and what's so secret about them? Joining us now, Michael Schmidt, Pulitzer Prize winning Washington correspondent for the New York Times. Michael, tell me and help me out here. Is this like not returning library books on time? How serious a problem is this really, and what's in these documents?
Well, it's more serious than library books because these are documents that hold the country's greatest secrets and most important national security information. And these types of issues with classified documents are ones that have tripped up former senior government officials time and time again over the past few decades. You had the former CIA director Deutsch, who got in trouble for it. You had Sandy Berger, who tried to take classified documents out in his socks. You had David Petraeus, the famed post 9/11 war general, who himself got into trouble for giving out classified or holding on to classified information in ways that he shouldn't. And of course, you had Hillary Clinton, whose own use of a personal email account became an investigation of her treatment of classified information. So this is something that historically senior government officials have run into problems with and dealing, for dealing with. So in that sense, what we're seeing here is a repeat of those issues. A lot of those types of investigations do not result in charges. That was sort of the famous and important part of the Hillary Clinton investigation. The fact that she wasn't charged, and the FBI director at the time, James Comey, held a press conference to announce that. So in this case, you have investigations now into Donald Trump's handling of classified documents, Joe Biden's handling of classified documents, and Mike Pence's handling of classified documents. All the investigations are different. They differ significantly in the facts, especially between Trump and the other two. But they're serious national security matters, so serious that the Attorney General of the United States has appointed special counsels to investigate, to do the Trump investigation and do the Biden investigation.
Obviously, the Pence documents and the Biden documents have sort of put a different gloss on what Donald Trump was supposed to have done. But what is the difference? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative in Trump versus the other two so far?
So there's a few different differences. The first major one is that when Pence and Biden, based on our public understandings, found out that they had these documents, they immediately turned around and told the National Archives about this. They told the government about this. That is the most important difference, because in the Trump case, Trump had the documents, was asked to return them, and refused time and time again to return them. And then, after being served with a subpoena, told the Justice Department that he had returned all the documents. And then, after the FBI executed a search warrant at his Mar-a-Lago home and club, they found many, many more classified documents, even though he had said he had returned everything. In the case of Pence and Biden, based on our understandings, they went to the government and said, hey, I have these documents. I need to give them back to you. I know I should not have them.
So that is a big difference. But I know it's hard to assess this from afar, of course, and maybe we'll find out at the result of various investigations. But what is the motivation? If Pence and Biden were sloppy or took them home and forgot about them, what is the motivation, do we think, with Donald Trump? Why would he take them? Why would he keep them? Why would he say he didn't have them?
Well, I'd hate to try and get inside of Donald Trump's mind to understand why he makes certain decisions. I think what we've seen with Trump is a pattern where he believes that whatever he wants is his. Some of the reporting has shown that he wanted to hold on to some of these classified documents because he saw them as keepsakes from his administration, sort of tchotchkes that he wanted to take with him, albeit very, very serious ones. And he's someone that has shown very little regard for the processes and sensibilities and sensitivities and norms around presidential power, the Justice Department, and the rule of law. So when you combine those issues together, those are some of the reporting that we've learned through our reporting about why is it that he may have held on to these materials.
Michael, as you have reported and others have said, Daniel Patrick Moynihan had a lengthy report on this, so much is classified as top secret that really doesn't have to be. So as an American citizen, should I be concerned that Donald Trump has classified documents that he had been withholding, that he took home, that potentially were vulnerable to someone else seeing? What was in these documents that made them top secret, and were we threatened by them in terms of our national security?
So we don't know. There's a range of different classified materials. Some people have said, look, there's classified and then there's classified. There are things that are classified that if you read them, you would say, I, the average American, know that. The drone program run by the CIA is a classified program that the government will not discuss publicly. It's on the front pages of papers and news outlets across the country, but to the government, it's classified. In that sense, that is something that is not really too secret. If a classified document could also provide listings of vulnerabilities that the United States has to its own infrastructure or its telecommunication systems. Those are certainly things that you would not want to be public. Classified documents could contain the names or positions or sort of ranks of sources that we have, the United States has in foreign governments. That's certainly not something that you would want out there. So you really need to see what the materials are. And in the Justice Department trying to figure out what to do in these cases, they look at a range of different actions, behaviors, motivations, and such in their investigation. One of them is, why was it that this person had these classified documents? If in the case of Biden and Pence, it was that they were accidentally boxed up and these were sort of, sloppy, bookkeeping and they shouldn't have had them. And as soon as they figured it out, they gave them back. That's one thing. If they figured out in the case of Trump, that he truly knew that he needed to give them back and was not giving them back and was taking obstructive acts to do that, then that's different. At the same time, the questions that the government would want to look at and answer is, what is in these documents? What do these documents say? Are these documents that are truly, truly sensitive? Are these documents that are classified and indeed protected by law, but are less damaging to national security? One of the things that these investigations do is they assess the damage done by the behavior. So they try and figure out, okay, this document was at this location for this amount of time. These are the amount of people who had access to that location. This is who may have seen it. This is how the documents were protected. And that part of the investigation is not really determining whether anyone's going to be charged. It's determining what steps the government needs to take to ensure that national security is not damaged further by the fact that these documents have been out there.
Michael, you're absolutely right. Neither of us want to try to probe into Donald Trump's mind or motivations. But other than a scrapbook, why else would he have kept these documents and not wanted to return them?
Well, as I said, one of the reasons that he wanted to keep them was that he thought that everything that was, that he could see was his, and that he wanted to keep these as keepsakes from his time. I realize that may sound a bit ridiculous, but that was sort of our understanding. There are certainly more nefarious reasons you could come up with for why someone would want to hold on to national security information. It is often something that gives the FBI a lot of concern when they see that someone has this stuff, because they wonder, why is it that this individual has these documents? Is there a theme to these documents? Are these documents all about one particular country or one particular type of investigation or such? We also know that Donald Trump was obsessed from the beginning of his presidency with the Russia investigation. There were classified documents that Trump thought showed wrongdoing by those who investigated him, or how all of this had been, in his words, a witch hunt. So did he hold on to those documents because he wanted to somehow use them to prove that he had done nothing wrong? Donald Trump, behaves in, unusual ways and treated the law and norms in ways that we had not seen from most recent presidents. So, in some ways, it's a surprise. It was a very surprising development to have the FBI have to go over the walls at Mar-a-Lago to go and get these documents back in August. But given all of the different highly unusual things that Trump had done, if you think about it like that, maybe it's less surprising.
Michael, you've also written about the January 6th committee and the criminal referrals from Congress to the Justice Department. What is the actual impact of those? What is the legal weight of that criminal referral from Congress?
So those can sort of be looked at in two different ways. Those are largely symbolic documents that create public and a bit of internal pressure on the Justice Department. Those referrals basically say, hey, Justice Department, we, another branch of government, in this case Congress, have found information that we believe shows criminal wrongdoing. We believe you should be alerted to it, and that prosecutions could be made off of this. By doing that, you're adding an additional layer of pressure to the department, because you're taking the political power or perception of power from Capitol Hill, putting it out there and saying, Justice Department, even though it's widely known that these events happen, we believe that they're criminal and that you should look at them that way. Now, in some cases, a document like that can be very significant when the Justice Department does not know about a crime. Congress could say something like, look, we know that there's this evidence that shows, I'm just making this up, but some sort of bribery scheme went on, and here's the evidence that we have. And the Justice Department opens the letter and says, oh my, we did not know about this. We need to go investigate it. In this case, in the January 6th case, all of it was, much of it, was done publicly. The January 6th insurrection attack, whatever you're going to call it, on the Capitol was probably the most photographed, videoed crime in American history. Those cases, what happened that day has been widely covered in the press, and the January 6th public hearings that brought a lot more public attention on what occurred were all on national television. So in that sense, the move by the committee is more about pressure than it is about anything, because Congress, the Justice Department can get their hands on a lot of the evidence that Congress has developed, and the Justice Department actually has more powers than Congress does to go out and get information. So in this case, it's more saying, look, we're the January 6th committee. We spent a lot of time on this. We developed a certain level of credibility with the public, and we believe that criminality occurred here, and we're going to say it out loud because we believe it's that important.
Michael Schmidt, Washington correspondent of the New York Times, thank you so much for that perspective. And coming up next, as thousands of New Yorkers fall behind on rent, some are saying that public housing is facing a disaster. In 2022, the New York City Housing Authority collected only 65% of the rent it charged, the lowest percentage in the agency's nearly 100-year history. Aging buildings, elevators that don't work, lack of government help, coupled with not being able to collect rents, have led some to conclude public housing is facing a disaster in New York and also in other cities. Mayor Adams has a plan that is being called contentious to place the city's housing developments under private management to decrease reliance on government funding. And while less money is coming in, NYCH's costs appear to be increasing. Joining us to discuss this, Mihir Zaveri, Metro reporter for the New York Times, who's been covering the public housing crisis. Just how serious is this? 65% of rent lot of deficit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that amounts to about more than $450 million, at least in November, and that number's been growing. They collect about $1 million, or have been collecting about $1 billion in the past, and now it's down to like 800 million or so. So it's a big deal. And the way they've been sort of dealing with this so far is like cutting some positions, trying to, patch things here and there, and pulling from the reserves. They started 2023 with less than 1 month's worth of reserves. That's not very much. If anything happens, some emergency happens, they're not going to be able to cover the cost potentially. So it's a pretty serious problem. And as you mentioned, the costs are growing. So as I think most New Yorkers know, living in public housing is very challenging. There's a lot of leaks, there's a lot of elevator outages, a lot of issues. Fixing those things is costly, and you have to pay people to do that. And that cost is growing over time. So these two things kind of happening at the same time is, as you say, a disaster in their mind.
Mihir, does it create a vicious cycle? People don't pay rent, there aren't enough money for repairs, so people are even less likely to pay rent. How, where does this end up?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility. There's some evidence to suggest that that's the case, although no one's really looked into it to see whether that is one of the major reasons or not. But certainly, I mean, there are people who do that. If you potentially are at a court case over repairs or something like that, I mean, you might withhold the rent until those repairs are completed. If the agency or the landlord, NYCHA in this case, can't do those, then we don't know where we could head up. So, I mean, there's a variety of scenarios that this could go. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's some plans to sort of reform how the agency operates. The city has been subsidizing the agency, increasing amounts of money over the years. So, maybe the state government chips in, although they so far haven't in any significant degree. So we'll see. What
are the penalties for not paying rent? I mean, you can't normally get away without paying rent, can you, in any kind of housing, or can you?
You typically cannot, according to the rules, but there's a few things going on right now. As I think everyone knows, coming out of the pandemic, there was a big sort of rent issue for a lot of people who lost work, and we had a rent relief program here in New York City, in New York State. And if you applied for that, that meant that a landlord could not take an eviction case against you. They couldn't even file one, they couldn't proceed with one. So if you talk to the landlord lobby, for example, they'll say, this is basically giving people a free ride. They don't have to pay rent, they just have to apply for this thing, and then nothing happens. In the case of public housing specifically, that amount of money has basically been depleted for other tenants, non-public housing tenants. So none of the people in public housing have gotten any money. So there are people who have applied for this thing. The agency can't sue them, can't move to evict them. Nothing can happen, essentially, and they're basically stuck in this position and with no money, more money coming.
Basically, because once they've applied, they're not subject to eviction.
Exactly. And if you think about eviction, I mean, in the past, NYCHA had filed some 40,000, 50,000 eviction cases every year. Small fraction of those actually resulted in evictions. But what did end up happening was you go through the court case, maybe you come to a settlement, maybe you get tapped into some aid program, maybe you get a one-shot deal from the city, which is a specific type of city aid. So those things, it's not clear whether those things are happening to the same effectiveness that they were in the court system.
Public housing really began in New York City. The first houses down on the Lower East Side, it was for the working poor. What's changed now, if anything? Why doesn't this financing formula work anymore?
Yeah, I mean, very simple answer is over the decades, and particularly during some Republican federal administrations, the funding for for public housing across the country has been reduced. There has been an overall shift toward more private actors in housing and away from this concept. So what that's meant for NYCHA is that it just hasn't been keeping up its buildings, which are growing older and older and older every day. Boilers are breaking, elevators are breaking, there's mold, there's leaks, there's all these problems, and they just keep growing. And there just hasn't been enough money to kind of patch it all together.
So why would private management, as the mayor suggests, make a difference if the money isn't coming in anyway and the expenses are rising?
So basically, it's essentially a workaround. This stream of funding, federal funding that I mentioned that's been declining, that's one pot. But if, as I mentioned, there's been a shift toward more private actors in housing. So there's a whole other pot of federal money that's available if you have a private landlord, for example. So by shifting. It's just basically a trick almost. You shift over to private management and you can tap into this whole additional pool of funds. And then that enables you to borrow money against those funds too. So it just opens a whole new world up to NYCHA.
So what's the downside of that? Tenants are afraid that a private landlord is not going to be as receptive as a public one?
Essentially, I mean, and on some symbolic level, it's a really sad symbol of the nation's retreat from the idea that it should be providing for some portion of the population. But yeah, on a more specific level, these private actors, there may not be as much accountability in the minds of many tenants. NYCHA and all the proponents of this program will tell you, well, no, all the protections are still there. We can still, we still own the land, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's still an open question to see at the end of the day, whether this program is sort of scrutinized to the same degree that it could be in a public setting.
And if I'm right, the federal government was maybe this close to taking over NYCHA, or certainly becoming the steward for it. The city managed to forestall that. How has that agreement affected this?
Yeah, I mean, that is actually a big component. As you noted, the federal government almost took it over. Instead, they came to an agreement, the city, NYCHA, and the federal government, in which there'd be a monitor appointed. So there's an independent monitor who's sort of assessing NYCHA's progress and improving all these conditions. And it's part of a legal agreement where you have to fix these things by these deadlines, essentially. Those costs are increasing over time because those deadlines are accumulating. Mm-hmm. So those costs combined with declining rental revenue is sort of a big piece of why the sort of disaster, as you spoke about, is happening right now.
How long can I not pay rent and not face any consequences for it?
Well, if you were living in public housing, there's a few factors at play. One, if you say you lost your job or your income changed or something like that, the agency does have a process by which you can adjust your rent in those cases. Mm-hmm. So, that's a scenario that many people might fall into. If you're one of the people who's just like, I'm not going to pay right now, if you've applied for rent relief and that application's pending, there's nothing that can be done, right now. But if you haven't, NYCHA can still take you to court. They can take you to court, and there are still some, out of the many thousands, there's a small group of people that they're still suing right now, and we'll see if that number changes as this crisis continues to unfold.
Thanks for joining us, and I'm sure you'll be back with some updates. Mihir Zaveri of the New York Times, and coming up next, my thoughts on a journalistic giant. A gentle giant of journalism died this week. His name was Victor Novaski. He was the publisher of the venerable Nation magazine. He wrote The Naming Names and other books. He used to report for the New York Times magazine. You can read more about Vic in the spot-on obit by Joe Berger in the Times. He was puckish with a healthy disrespect for authority and for self-proclaimed experts. A book he wrote with Christopher Cerf was a wake-up call for writers about predicting the future and about uncritically quoting gurus who claim to be endowed with crystal balls. The book was titled The Experts Speak. In retrospect, many of the experts quoted in the book probably wish they hadn't or could retract what they said. Erasmus Wilson of Oxford opined in 1878 that when the Paris exhibition closes, electric light will close with it, and no more will be heard of it. Lord Kelvin, the British physicist, prophesied in 1895 that, quote, heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Barely 8 years later, the Wright brothers proved him wrong. He also forecast that radio had no future and that X-rays were a hoax. In 1929, the Yale economist Irving Fisher anticipated that stock prices had reached what he called a permanently high plateau. In 1943, Thomas Watson, who founded IBM, projected that the world market for computers wouldn't require an adding machine to calculate. A total of about 5 computers, he said, should satisfy everyone's needs. Talent scouts predicted Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley would both flop. Novaski was a student of history. he tapped into the past to place the present in perspective. He discounted the futurists who proclaimed the end of the future. He was skeptical of people who claim a monopoly on what passes for fact. I think it was Walter Cronkite who used to end his nightly newscasts by saying, "That's the way it is," Novaski said. Well, I wanted to put out a magazine which would say, "That's not the way it is at all. Let's take another look." For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.